We're good to go whenever you are.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm Gary Dean. I'm the Vice Chair of the Arlington Community Oversight Board. I'll be the acting chair tonight for Lisa, who could not be here. So I'd like to officially open the meeting of the Community Oversight Board meeting of August 16, 2022. So welcome to everybody. It's good to see smiling faces and real faces together, and I look forward to a great meeting. So welcome. The first order of business is for me to take tenants, and so I'm just going to do a quick roll call. I know Lisa, the chair, is not here. I'm here as the acting chair. David Smith, I'm here. Okay, Martin Necessario is absent. Julie Evans. Here. Anika Montgomery is not present. Sasha Ridley is not present. Gary Coffey, not present. Jim Miller.
Happy to be here.
Okay. We do not have a quorum. Therefore, item 2 on the agenda, we will not do today. Item 2 was to adopt the policy governing electronic meetings and electronic participation in meetings. But absent a quorum, we're going to have to push that to the next meeting. Okay, so that was the reason we delayed just a few minutes. So we've already skipped past that. So today we're going to focus on the training. We have Arlington County Police Chief Penn. Welcome to your team. It's good to see everybody.
Happy to be here first.
Yeah, we've been tracking you guys a lot of activity in the county, but we're so happy to see kind of ACPD in action and a lot of the results. I know been, unfortunate for some people, but it's been really good to see all the things that you guys are doing, and we're starting to really get our feet wet from the ride-alongs and really start to get a good understanding of the culture of the police department. We look forward to continue our training, which is the focus right now. So we might have a quorum. Okay, so let's pause for a second. Hi, Anika.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Good, how are you doing? Sorry I'm late.
Okay, let's pause for a second. Graham? No? Okay. All right, we're still missing one. Okay, so no change, Anika. We're counting you present now, but we do not have a quorum. So all you missed is we are going to drop from the agenda. We were going to look at adopting the policy governing electronic meetings and electronic participation in meetings, but we're going to table that, postpone that until the next meeting that we have a quorum. So what I'm going to do without further ado, we're going to focus on training tonight. And so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and hand the floor over who's the ACPT, who's going to be the appointed leader tonight. Okay, Latasha, I saw some command. I don't know if you felt some energy, but
Gary, can I make one quick comment?
Just one pause, Jim. And Jim, just like Jim is our COB training rep, so that's why I'm gonna let him make this introduction.
Thanks, Gary. Quick shout out to Captain Chamberlain and her team organizing our ride-alongs. We are nearly 70% done for the board for all 3 ride-alongs. That's across the board. Nearly everyone has gotten at least one, if not more than one, 2, 3 for those of us got all 3 done. And no doubt, as I've said it before, and I think that it's worth saying and repeating that the view of Arlington County through the windshield of the police cruiser looks a lot different. Even if I'm driving even if I'm in the car on the same route that I take my kid to school, it looks a lot different. And I can't thank you enough, and Chief Penn and the team and everyone, the outstanding officers that I've had the privilege to work alongside and spend some time with for many hours inside that passenger seat. It's been quite interesting and a bit of a thrill. Nothing like a 1 o'clock in the morning, throw those lights on and cruise down at 90 miles an hour to get that adrenaline going, just as I was starting to wake you up a little bit bored. Yeah, it's boring. Now I'm awake. So just absolutely excellent, and I just want to make that quick shout out. And Board's doing really well, by the way. Training across the board from last week. We nearly hit the 50. Actually, we're a bit over the 50% mark with finishing Nicole and from tonight. So really good shape so far. I'll have a better outlook at our next meeting.
Yeah, thanks. And one of the tasks I'm going to give to Jim, and I've talked to Lisa about this, Mummy, is us coming up with a way to try and consolidate kind of some of the key, like already a couple of us have kind of said, wow, I saw the same thing. And there might be some feedback just from our fresh, not knowing what we're looking at, giving you just a fresh thing on a couple of things that we've seen that I know I was impressed with. I think we talked a little bit about a couple of the incidents that happened, but we think there might be some value in us kind of consolidating some of the key things that apply to our role as a COB, but I feel like we want to be kind of teamwork, Mummy, with making sure that we are open and transparent with some of these key nuggets. So we'll be working with you on that, Jim, to work on how do we consolidate that feedback. Yes.
I want to second what he said about the officers. I believe his name is Sergeant Smith Gold and Officer Maggie Smith.
Yes.
I was with her on my evening shift. God bless her. No, overnight, because she really kept me on. She was just talking. I was like, "Oh, you're like really? Wait." She's like, "Oh, I love this shift," and I was like, "God bless you." Right now, I'm struggling, and they really was very informative. They broke down things that I didn't even. Before I could ask a question, they was out there. They was like, "Oh, this is District such and." I was like, "Oh, I'm in District 3. Now I know." Okay, so it was a good experience, and I think I might just sign it, but I'm just because it was really good just to see them. And then I can't remember the officer I had, but that was the night of the fire
On the street.
Yes, and I think her name is Carrie or Carly.
Wisner.
Yes, and she just went straight in and she didn't hesitate. She pulled up, I think it was like the second, either we was the second or third car, and she just jumped out, and I didn't see her for the rest of the night. She was just, no question, no hesitation. I'm seeing her pulling people out, and I just wanted to give, that recognition to them.
Thank
Didn't
you.
even think about her own safety or anything. She just went in there, fire coming out, and she's just going back in there to get them. So I just want to recognize that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the floor to ACPD now. And I guess this is good because we've been trapped in Zoom
Yes.
where you don't tend to communicate. So where we can get some talking about the topic, I look forward to the learning, but I also, where we can allow a few people, it's going to be good for us learning each other. So
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you guys for all the amazing comments reference the experience so far. Today, we're going to start with the Criminal Investigations Division. These are some of our leaders for our division overall. They're going to share with you some of the things that we do within the specific section. And then we have one last minute change versus a case study. We're going to be doing CIT training first, and then we'll go into the department wellness program, so you guys can understand about that as well. Okay. And first up, we have Captain Michael Rowling. He is over the Homeland Security section. You have Captain Patrick Donahue, who's over the Organized Crime section. And you have Lieutenant Damon Washington, who's one of the lieutenants within the Criminal Investigations section. Okay.
All right. Well, thanks again for having us, and thank you for the comments. It's great. It's great to hear that you guys had a positive experience. So I'm Mike Rowling. As Tasha said, I oversee the Homeland Security section. I've been with the department 25 years, and I've been assigned this position for a few months now. So I'm just getting my feet wet into it. But I'm just going to do a brief overview of kind of like what we have, what we do, what I can tell you, and then be happy to answer any questions you guys have. It's a smaller section. I have a sergeant, and then I have 2 units. I have a crime analysis unit, and then I have the intelligence unit, which is part of our detectives that we have. I'll talk about them first. So I have 4 detectives. One of them is assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force with the FBI. He works out of the field office over in Washington, D.C. He deals with a lot of covert stuff, a lot of uncover, plainclothes type of intelligence. All these folks have security clearance and whatnot, so some of the information is confidential that can't be shared. So we always have to leave that information, what we can pass within the agency, either the chief pen or those who have a clearance, in order to make operational decisions. as far as how we function within the county and how it impacts us. So the one detective works out of that field office. He's boots on the ground. He'll get assigned cases. Anything that has a nexus to Arlington County, he'll get involved in or he'll be notified of. And then he relays that information back to me, our Chief Penn. We share that information amongst the command staff to make decisions on how it might impact Arlington County. Every so often, there are cases at a federal level that are investigated and prosecuted at a federal level that he may be the point person on, which may not even be involved in Arlington, but primarily he's responsible for anything Arlington related or at least in this general vicinity. Another detective I have works on the Cyber Crimes Task Force. He's based out of the field office, FBI out of Manassas. So very similar to the other officer or detective. He'll report information back to me or Chief Penn or anything that's cyber crimes related incident that could be at a national level. It could have implications for Arlington County. Again, everything comes back to Arlington County, us having these representatives on the task force, is just about information sharing, attending meetings, gatherings, things like that. I attended many of those meetings at the different federal offices, whether they're online through Teams or Zoom or in person now, most of them in person. There's some training that are set up, so we share information on cases that they're working. There's a lot of times, a lot of these cases cross county line, right? Prince William, Fairfax, sometimes DC, Maryland, different jurisdictions. And it's a big network of information sharing, but at a more of a classified type level. And again, taking all that information will inform best case decisions and how we respond to those here in Arlington County.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure can.
So relative to this current environment right now with the threats to the FBI, just from what you said, it sounds like that you have somebody plugged into that level of collaboration in DC, i.e. if there was an Arlington County resident who popped up on the radar in the cyber realm, you guys would, though that was a federal input, you guys would be plugged into that.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll have information, free flowing information like that. I just put out, like I receive bulletins on a daily basis, and I vet some of those things. Some things are not classified that I can share within the agency, and sometimes I'll push it out to our command staff, which is our captains to the chief, and share that information so that they decide they want to pass it down to their staff. If it's operational need, then they can. Otherwise, they don't pass it on. So we all vet the information to see what's relevant. But yeah, good question. Two other detectives I have actually work in-house at our headquarters across the street. The first one does a lot of the internal stuff that have specific ties to Arlington County. That can be bomb threats, things such as swatting calls. If you don't know what a swatting call is, that's kind of like, somebody calling an active shooter at a school, but it's a hoax and they're trying to get resources to respond and eat it all up, and cause chaos and havoc and shut things down. And it's just a hoax. So we'll investigate who did that, try to background checks, things like that to determine who the suspect might be, things like that.
Is there much of that?
It happens around the region quite a bit. It's been an uptick in the last probably 12 months for sure. There was one time where we had quite a few, whether Prince William, Fairfax, maybe not so much as us, but whenever it happens in our jurisdictions or surrounding jurisdictions, we share that information, be prepared. We let our staff know, our dispatchers know, hey, these are going on in case we get a call. It could be. We still got to treat it as a real thing until we can deem it's not. So, in my fourth detective, she pretty much does all of our social media intelligence. She goes into Facebook and TikTok and Twitter and all these social media accounts that maybe our kids have that I'm not as familiar with, but she is very familiar with. And she'll go in and scrub those and kind of work behind the scenes to figure out if there are any type of threats or maybe some protests are developing, and there might be a protest. We had the Supreme Court justices, recently. Where do they live? Where are the threats going to be? What are we seeing in social media? What's the chatter? And she does a deep dive into that information to determine what might have some kind of tie to Arlington County and what kind of response you might have. I think you might have already met with Captain Quigley, who handles our SWAT team and things like that. He also handles our civil service unit. So if we identify protests or something that might come up or some kind of, civil unrest that might happen, we share information amongst our command staff to see what kind of response we have. So that's pretty much our 4 detectives we have on the intelligence side. The other side is our crime analysis unit. I have 3 civilian employees. And what they do is pretty much that. They analyze all kinds of data. One individual does our mapping, our GIS mapping in reference to points around the county and roads and hotspots of crime sprees, of largely from autos, or whatever the case might be. He'll put all the geographical data together and then share that so we can actually develop what crime trends are out there and how do we go about combating those and making sure that doesn't happen any further. So he does a lot of that. We have 2 other female crime analysis units who pretty much work with data on that data analysis. They generate wanted posters, intelligence reports. We have a bi-weekly report. I actually made a copy. I can't pass it around because it's actually can't be disseminated, but just to show you a quick example, different type of offenses. We have larceny, malicious moving, robberies. These are all cases that could be being investigated now, which some of it can't be released to the public, but we keep it in-house. And we do a thing where we talk about calls for service, the volume, number of calls. We do like a heat map based on time of day, what day of the week it is, things like that. So we know where do we need our resources. And so it's that type of data analysis that we actually collect to figure out how do we take our resources, where do we find them, share that information with command staff so chief can make a decision as to how we respond. Yeah.
So the data that your analyst is analyzing actually is generated by Arlington Police, or is it?
So we'll have calls for service, and our dispatchers
Collects that,
receive.
yeah.
Yep, and so all that goes into our alarm system, which is our law enforcement
Records management.
records management. I shouldn't even try to start that because all the acronyms that we have. But pretty much it's a data warehouse of all our calls for service, time of day, things like that. And we can pull that data in order to form crime analysis as to where we should deploy resources or where things are happening. And that way, and Lieutenant Washington will talk about what his team can do with that information. He goes out and actually helps make arrests and that kind of thing. So thanks. Other than that, we do a lot of planning for big events like Marine Corps Marathon. We talk about protest events, anything of a national security that comes up that can have an nexus to the National Capital Region, to include Arlington County. We do a lot of bulletins, pre-planning, push information out for our patrol officers so they know what they should be looking for. If there's an incident at a metro, or maybe we have election time, we're worried about pulling routes and stuff like that. Make sure you do extra checks, kind of putting maps out together for everybody to see how they should respond. So that's kind of it. A lot of it is classified, some of it's not, and we just kind of take all this information, share it, and try to make the best decision possible, provide safety to Arlington County. So, what questions might you have?
Perhaps you can do a bit of a case study review. Late last year, within Northern Virginia, there was increase of threats towards malls and public spaces. Can you talk a little bit about how did your unit respond to that? What kind of information did you receive? And how did Arlington County respond to that?
Well, I know there was one specific threat that came in through Fairfax. I think it was one of their malls. I can't remember if it was Tyson or Fair Oaks, or so it was one of their malls came in specific as a target. Sometimes we don't know if that's one of those swatting type calls where they're just trying to cause panic. But we always have to take it serious, right? Until we can vet it to find out if it's really something that's happening or if it's not. But what we'll do is we get a call like that, or we receive information, we'll share that, and a decision is made usually amongst the command staff that maybe we need to deploy more resources. So maybe we'll have some off-duty officers come in and go work around the mall, right? Or we have good partnerships with our malls, in Fashion Center Mall down in Crystal City, or Pentagon City. We'll find out, all right, you need 4 officers. We can either do an off-duty program, or we'll proactively deploy officers down there and have them put our LPR cars out there, our license plate readers, to pick up if we're looking for something in particular. Anything we can use. We have cameras that we can move around in certain places if we think there's a high threat somewhere. That way, if something does happen, we can try to capture it for investigative purposes. But it's more of a deterrent to put more bodies out there to show kind of a preventive measure, if nothing else. So that's kind of what we did. We didn't have anything specific here in Arlington, but we take that information, specific ones in Fairfax, and we say, okay, what can we do here in case they decide they want to come to the county? So,
And then when you dial down that security posture to normal, move to that recovery phase, are you analyzing the threat stream to see if it's gone down, obviously,
Yeah.
just letting some time pass? I mean, if there's no impact?
Yeah, so like that one detective I told you about that handles social media, she'll go through and screw up what's the chatter. Like maybe the Antifa was a group that decided they wanted to go after the mall, for example, right? I think everybody's heard of them. You know, we go through, we try to do the research on them to find out, okay, how many people are coming? What's the anticipate? A lot of times they'll post that stuff. You know, we got 3 people coming, we got 3,000 people coming. And that dictates what kind of response we might have to show. And if it's a large number like that, we think that is realistic and possible, then we might have to deploy our civil disturbance team, things like that. So we take all that data, all that information, and we try to form decisions based on real time, what we have, and once it's vetted, and try to make the best decision possible. So we usually err on the side of caution and be a little bit more proactive than more reactive. But we'd rather do that than be caught on the wrong sides.
That's helpful, sir. Thanks.
Do you have the manpower to do that, to respond to? And then.
It's definitely becoming more challenging. We just don't have the staffing that we used to. We still come up with ways, be creative in order to figure out how we can do that, whether it's through overtime, maybe adjusting hours or whatnot. But geez, so you wanna.
Mike, can I ask something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just in a recent incident, right? You said that you responded with the officer that you were doing the right along to the unfortunate incident that happened right here at Island Four Courts. I was out there also with my team. Chief came out too. Deputy Chief Cassidy was out there, and our resource was really strapped in that regard because that was an overlap day where both 2 evening shifts were working. One evening shift was out of the county doing training, and the other evening shift was already responding to a lot of other calls. And then unfortunately, one of the fire department's personnel was involved in an unfortunate incident also. So that split our services to have people respond to his incident and also this major incident that happened here. I was assigned the county itself while the watch commander was assigned that incident. And at that time, I had no one in service to respond to calls for service. It was a domestic south side and something else going on at the mall on south side. We had to call back other officers. We used our partners from the sheriff's department. They allowed us to have some deputies who also responded out to the street to assist us. We have units that are in the area that are doing, like Captain said, working off duty. We called back all the off-duty units and said, now it's time to work, for Arlington County. They came in and worked, and then we sent out through our messaging system to all available officers for the midnight officers to come in early, and if anyone else was available to come in. We got a lot of response to that. We was able to staff up the county in a quick manner and address those calls for service. And then once we no longer needed personnel, we reached a number that I thought was appropriate for us to operate. I just sent out another message and letting everyone know that we had the personnel needed, and then everyone else could, not come in, and we tapped it down.
So I'll add a little bit to that. I mean, we're very fortunate to have incredibly committed staff, and when Damon asked for more help, I think you got a lot of response to that. He came back readily, and that we try not to do it that way unless we have to, which in that scenario we have no choice. But the staffing is becoming more of a challenge. But we have good partnerships throughout the region. I mean, we had a special event recently that required a lot of staff, and it's not something we normally do. We actually had mutual aid partners from other jurisdictions, like we will with the Marine Corps Marathon and the Army 10 miler, because we just don't have the numbers to do it. I mean, if you look at the Marine Corps Marathon, it takes about 281 officers for us to get through that day. That counts patrol and Clarendon in the marathon. So as of today, we're 56 officers short out of 376. But functionally, if you take out all the officers who are in some form of training, because they can't go out and do the job solo, we're in the low 280s. So, there's definitely challenges with it, but we have always found a way, and we've made a lot of adjustments to the department, and I'm sure you've seen the service reductions that we had to do with the community, and we continue to look at what modifications we have to make sure that we always have our staffing available at a level where we can respond with at least the minimum while we get more people back in. So it's a constant conversation. It is becoming more of a challenge.
That's the thing that was going through my mind as I'm standing there, because I did stay there because I was thinking she was gonna come back at some point, and then I looked up 2 hours later, I'm like, yeah, she's not coming back, so let me leave. I was like, all the officers, because it looked like to me like all the officers. I was like, well, who's patrolling the rest of the county?
They
That's what I
were.
was thinking as I'm looking at everyone just coming in and do their job. I was like, I'm sure not everyone's here, but it just felt like everyone was there.
No,
Pretty
everyone,
much everyone was there.
everyone was there.
You know, but we're in a situation too, where we're very fortunate in this area that all of us work well together. So, you know, after the complex coordinated attacks started happening in Europe, where in multiple sites, we're having acts of violence or active shooters, we worked as a region to come up with lists so we know what each other's resources are. And more importantly, if we have an active violence, an active shooter, we have the ability for a certain call type, and all the chiefs have agreed to it, that if we have an active shooter, we put out a certain call type and other agencies will send automatically 5 officers and a supervisor. So we can boost our staffing by 25 or 30 people, ideally within 15, 20 minutes. And, you know, that's meant to be temporary until we get our own folks back in. But that's an important part of law enforcement, I think everywhere now, is realizing that no one agency can do it all by themselves. And I think we're very fortunate that we have great partnerships across this region, both locally and with our federal partners. Mike's unit was born post 9/11. You know, you either have or will hear from the tactical training unit, Homeland Security section. These are all things that we created after 9/11 to make sure that we have all the intel, we're plugged in where we need to be plugged in, and we train our staff at the highest level to respond to whatever might happen here. And I'm confident we're doing that. But, you know, the work that the Homeland Security section does is invaluable in the information gathering, because, you know, there's dozens of bulletins a day and everybody can't read each one of them. So having something concise that comes out of our own shop that is focused on our area of responsibility is really important.
Coordination statewide or mostly more Northern Virginia?
I can speak about them.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know that it's not.
Sure. Yeah.
I think we have, you know, I talk to peers across the state and country. Like, I think some of our relationships with the federal government are stronger than some other places. You know, the way we work across public safety in Arlington is different than other places in the country where, you know, we work well and regularly with our fire department. Same thing with our sheriff's office. That's not true everywhere, but we're very fortunate here that it is true. And we do a lot of things jointly and collectively to make sure that when something like what happened at Fort Worth happens, we come together quickly and work together very well. You probably saw in the middle of the lanes, there was 2 trucks that had the green light. The green light is where command is. So you had a fire truck right here, a police truck right here. So the fire incident commander's here, the police are right here. And that's so we're acting together and no one entity's doing their own thing. And, you know, the green light is a symbol for people to show up. If you see green, that's where you go. But the trucks were right, 6 to 8 feet apart. In that way, we make sure that what we're doing collaboratively and collectively and as one instead of 2 or 3 or 4 different agencies. So lots of good stuff there.
Are you guys seeing an increase in juvenile crime? Because I've heard a lot about that in other places around the country.
There's been some. I mean, I know at the mall, for example, at least I can tell you for fashion centers had a little bit of an uptick in that. It's just a matter of having the resources to be able to identify everybody, or, you know, and plus the mall, like that particular mall is pretty close to, you know, highways. Like you get on 395 and go north-south really quick, right? Or 66, which is not too far off, but they want to get outside of Arlington, you know, we're really not pursued for any type of juvenile offense type of thing. So they know they can get away with some things. So.
Okay. So my take, I guess this is a question really for anybody, Chief, but so this really, since 9/11, has brought this proactive element to things, right? I mean, it looks like most of your things are to get ahead of boom, whatever boom is, kids, whatever. Is this how most, would you, and a lot of it's, I mean, our zip code location here makes it probably even more important, but would you say when we're looking at other departments, you know, we're talking with other Nicoles and things. Do all of them have something similar? It might be called different, but this proactive piece, has everybody pivoted to this proactive element?
Yeah, like that Joint Terrorism Task Force, for example, there's usually a member from all our local regional partners there. So
Yep.
Richmond County has somebody, Fairfax, Alexandria, you know, as long as the agency is large enough and they can supply somebody, even with our staffing numbers, you know, we know it's important to still have somebody there. Smaller departments may not have representation, right? Like maybe a Fairfax City, sometimes they don't, because they're a bit smaller.
Okay.
But Fairfax County does, so they share the information. So
Okay.
at least in this area, in the National Capital Region, yeah, yes. I can't speak for more rural areas.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about the rural.
Yeah.
Okay.
We also actively participate in COG, the Council of Governments. So monthly, all the SWAT commanders meet, all the CDU commanders meet, all the police chiefs meet, all the fire chiefs meet. So there's an organized body beyond what we do individually, where we all come together from different levels in the organization and different parts of the organization on a monthly basis to, you know, collaborate.
That's good.
Any other questions before I pass it over here? Captain Donnie?
All right, good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Pat Donahue. I'm captain in charge of our organized crime section. I do have a question before we start. This is being recorded, correct?
It is.
Yes.
And it's available to the public?
Yes.
Just want to make sure of that. So organized crime section, OCS, formerly known as VICE. Most people know VICE more than they do organized crime section. We changed the name a couple of years ago. My unit is primarily tasked with enforcement of illegal narcotics, money laundering, gang investigations, prostitution, and gambling. The vast majority of the investigations out of my unit are narcotics. And I would say that the second in terms of volume is probably gang investigations and money laundering. Prostitution and gambling have fallen off quite a bit. Gambling, particularly because there's so many legal ways to gamble these days. You can do it on your phone, on FanDuel, stuff like that. So we don't see a lot of that. I'm currently authorized for 14 detectives, 3 supervisors, and an admin assistant. I am down one detective. You see, there's 2 sections or 2 units within my section. One is the drug enforcement vice unit. I have a lieutenant over top of that. And I have 8 narcotics detectives that are within that unit. Like I said, the majority of my cases come out of those 8 narcotics detectives. On the other side of the house is the gang and special investigations unit. I have 2 gang detectives. Again, this is overseen by another lieutenant. So I have 2 lieutenants in the unit. I have 2 task force officers. So these are Arlington County officers that are assigned to DEA task force full-time, so by agreement. So one is stationed out at Dulles Airport, and the other one is stationed in Reston. So we pay their salary. The DEA, by agreement, if there's any overtime, they pay a certain amount of overtime. They also pay for a vehicle. So we drive. And the last person I have in that unit is a technical officer. The technical officer is very important because almost all of our cases have some form of a phone, a laptop, iPad, and all that information has to be downloaded via a search warrant for data. And that's how our detectives make a lot of their cases. So whenever we really harp on the officers when they make an arrest on the street, particularly drug arrest, that we seize that phone because we're going to get a search warrant for that phone. It has a lot of valuable data. So that technical officer is key in getting that data extracted off of those devices. That technical officer is also tasked with handling our covert operations for wires, cameras, anything that we would use out in the field to gather evidence. So they're a detective, but they don't really handle cases. They're more of a support function. And then I have an admin assistant, young lady that actually just hired because I retired. So what we do, we operate in a covert capacity, meaning we look just like you guys, we dress like you guys. We do that because we found if we dress like Mark in the back, that people aren't going to buy drugs. We're not going to sell drugs.
Out of business.
So we are off-site. We're not in the police department. We occupy a suite within the business community. And we are a small business in terms of forward-facing to the public. In reality, we are doing covert operations, and we do that mainly two ways. One, undercover operations. So I have my detectives. They go to training to how to become an undercover detective, and they will go out and buy drugs from drug dealers and make a case that way. The other major way that we do it is we have confidential sources that will give us information in exchange either for money or for consideration if they've been arrested for dealing drugs or being caught with drugs. Some of our confidential informants have been with my detectives for years, sometimes even decades, because they give us good information and they provide us with people that are dealing drugs in our community. So they are very useful. That's the majority of how we get our information. Like I said, the bulk of our cases are drug cases. These are complex drug cases that can last weeks, sometimes months. I'm talking about cocaine, meth, heroin, fentanyl, to a lesser extent, marijuana. The laws on marijuana are softening. It's decriminalized now. You can have an ounce on your person. You can grow 4 plants in your residence. You still can't sell it or smoke it in public. It's kind of similar to alcohol laws. But in 2024, there are plans to change that. It will be able to sell marijuana in the Commonwealth. So we have not really done a lot of cases of marijuana unless they're large quantity. And there is one case we had 2 years ago where we had a self-storage lot here in the county, and somebody brought a pallet of marijuana to sell. It was an operation from two guys that weren't from Arlington, but we seized over 500 pounds of marijuana in there. So it was a tip given to us by the DEA. So probably the biggest thing that we're dealing with right now is the opioid epidemic, right? So that's gripping the nation in quite a traumatic way. We're not immune to that. We have seen a rise since about 2015 in our overdose numbers and our fatalities from people overdosing on drugs. Just to give you a little bit of context, in 2015, we had 10 overdoses with 4 fatalities. We started seeing an increase, and it spiked in 2017, where we had 74 overdoses and 19 fatalities, 19 souls passed that year from drugs. So we knew that we had to do something and that we couldn't arrest our way out of this problem. So it was going to have to be a treatment and an education aspect to that. So in 2017, we started something called AARI, Arlington Addiction Recovery Initiative. This was a collaboration between us, Department of Human Services, the fire department, the sheriff's office, and the Commonwealth Attorney. And it was geared towards getting help for those that wanted help or needed help and getting them off of narcotics. Because we have had cases where people have overdosed, we've Narcaned them, we've brought them back to life. They go to the hospital, or maybe they go to jail. They get out of jail, they get out of the hospital, and they go right to using. We've Narcaned people twice in one day sometimes because it's just that powerful a drug. So we saw a little bit of success from 17 down to 19. 2019, we were back down to 42 overdoses with 6 deaths, but then COVID hit. And COVID was a real problem with our overdoses. That coupled with the introduction of fentanyl. Fentanyl has been mixed now with, when it first started out, it was mostly with heroin, just cut with heroin. Now it's being introduced into other drugs, cocaine, sometimes even marijuana. So our numbers skyrocketed. In 2019, we went to 74 overdoses with 20 people passing away. In 2021, we went up to 92 overdoses with 28 people passed away last year.
Can you say those last numbers?
Sure. So in 2020, we had 74 overdoses. 20 people died from them. And in 21, last year was 92 overdoses with 28 fatal.
Not to slow down on that, but just those numbers, say most of the deaths below age 30, or is it just all over the place? Is it the younger generation or?
We have seen a lot of young folks. So we had a case last weekend, a 14-year-old who took a fentanyl pill, had inquired about it with her parents. I don't know why her parents didn't think that was a red flag, but she got 2 fentanyl pills, took one, and her heart stopped. So she was Narcan, brought back to life, and our detectives are working with her to try and find out where she got those pills. But we've had dealers as young as 19, 20 years old that are dealing these pills. So there is a younger population that's getting into these drugs. The things with opioid, it's an equal opportunity drug. It doesn't matter if you're white, black, Hispanic, Asian, male, female, rich, poor. It affects everybody. And it's mainly because people get injured, have legitimate medical reasons for opioids, and they get hooked on it. So it becomes expensive. They turn to heroin or they turn to fentanyl because fentanyl is cheaper. And they get this similar high, and that's how they get hooked on it. So it's a very powerful epidemic right now that we're really struggling with. So some of the things that we're doing to try and combat that, through AARI, we obviously respond to all fatal overdoses. So I have detectives on call 24/7. So if we get a fatal overdose, they will respond along with our homicide unit. Right? So it's a death, an unnatural death. So both those detectives will come out, and my detectives are really focused on trying to find out who the supplier is, right? Getting that supplier identified and maybe arrested if we can. We've been somewhat successful on that. I would say probably about 20 to 25% of those fatal overdoses we're able to identify somebody and make either an identification or arrest. It's very hard to place a homicide charge on those dealers. However, if we can do another buy for them or from them, or get them caught with a product on them, we can make that arrest, at least hold them accountable for the distribution. We share the data with our Department of Human Services and our other jurisdictions in the area, because we do, obviously the drug problem isn't just limited to Arlington. Our other jurisdictions in the area have the same trends. If we get a bad batch, sometimes there is literally a batch of heroin, fentanyl that comes in, and it's not mixed well because these aren't chemists that are mixing it. And they will cause a rash of overdoses or deaths. So we share that information with our other jurisdictions. We share that information with our Department of Human Services, and we specifically give them contact information for the folks that have overdosed, because for them to reach out and give them services from the county. So another thing that we do in 2018, we installed drug take-back boxes because we realized that a lot of these addictions begin with medications that are in the home, medications that have been expired, or they're just kind of sitting around that people didn't need, or just waiting for somebody to take. So we provided an avenue for them to distribute or to deposit those, dispose of those. So we have 4 boxes in the county. 3 are at fire stations, and one is here attached to the 14th Street side of our police station. So we manage that. Since 2018, we have collected over 9,300 pounds of stuff. I'm not going to say it's all expired medication. People put all kinds of stuff in there, but it has collected quite a bit of medication that would otherwise be out there in the community. So that's been a good program. A couple other tools that we have. We recently gave the officers what we refer to as SERP. It's kind of a weird acronym. It sounds for Substance Use Referral Portal. So it's a QR code. It's a little sticker that they can put either on their MDT or on their notebook. And it's literally, if they get to somebody who's in need of services, particularly, it doesn't have to be just drug services. It can be alcohol services, other addictions. They can literally scan this code. The victim can scan this code, and it's a fillable form, name, phone number. It goes to our Department of Human Services, and somebody contacts them within 24 to 48 hours. To try and get them. It's just another avenue to try and get to them when they're at their lowest, because what we found is when they've just come out of overdosing or we've Narcan them, they're more accepting of help. And if we let them go for 2 or 3 or 4 days, then they're back in that cycle of using again. So we're trying to get that help to them that hopefully they can use as quickly as possible. Some other things we're using is alternative sentencing. We're trying to divert people from doing time in jail when maybe what they really need is treatment. So, my officers are kind of concentrated on finding out who these folks are, making an arrest if they can, holding them accountable, and that portion of the alternative sentencing really falls on the Commonwealth Attorney trying to find resolution if it warrants it for maybe getting them some treatment. Probably the biggest tool that's been effective for the officers is Narcan. So in 2019, we started distributing Narcan to officers. This was a grant given to us by Department of Human Services. So every officer now has 2 Narcans on their person, or at least in their cruiser. Even our detectives have it, and it's been used quite a bit over the years. To date, this year, we've had 50 applications of Narcan. And that includes our medics as well. But now that the officers have them, sometimes the officers are there before the medics are. So, and Narcan is very easy to use. If you're not familiar with it, it's basically a nasal spray that you put up the nose of the victim. And it's really, even if they're not suffering, if there's some other medical reason that they're passed out, it doesn't hurt them to do Narcan. So sometimes, they'll do Narcan just to be on the safe side. And it really is quite a miraculous recovery. You have people that really their hearts have stopped and they come back to life essentially.
So that's used for people that are unconscious, is that right?
Generally, yeah. If we can't revive them, and in general, you'll have some indications that there's drug use. Somebody calls it in. Right. They have a partner that says, my partner's passed out. We actually have laws now, safe harbor laws, that people were afraid to call. They would maybe dump somebody on the doorstep of the hospital or push them out of their house so they're not, don't die in their house. So we don't want that. We want them to call for help, because if we get to them, we can Narcan them, or medics can deal with them and maybe, help them. So we have safe harbor laws that have just come into effect within the last year or two, where you cannot be prosecuted. If you've overdosed or you call for somebody that's overdosed and we come and there are narcotics on site, assuming that they're not distribution amounts that you have personal amount of narcotics on site, we're going to take them, we're going to seize them, but you can't be prosecuted. And that's by design, to try and get people help that need it at the time. It doesn't preclude us from investigating those cases. We'll still talk to folks like, hey, do you want help? Do you want to help us try and get to these people that are pushing these drugs into our community? So that's it in a nutshell, what we do. Any questions? It's nothing like the movies, right? Miami Vice on us, so we drive rental cars. The county, we have a budget for rental cars that we use, so we're just driving regular Isuzus and Mitsubishis and whatnot. And again, we're dressed like regular folk. That's by design. We try. It's dangerous if an undercover officer is identified as an undercover officer, particularly during a deal. It's dangerous for a confidential source to also be identified as the person giving information to the police. So we're very careful about protecting their identity and protecting them from people knowing what they're doing.
How long does someone stay in an undercover capacity?
So we don't do like deep undercover where you're there for years and years. We're talking about
rotate
a couple of weeks maybe, or you might have a target that you may buy 2 or 3 times from. We built a case on. The reason we might buy more than once is we want to go, where do they go back to, right? Where's their residence? Because we would get a search warrant for their residence. Right. Who's the next dealer? Do they by chance go back to the next dealer? So we'll do surveillance. We also have GPS monitors that we can put on cars with the search warrant to find out where they go to, things like that. So Generally, we'll do a couple of buys from them and try and get to the bigger fish. And then we'll make the case. And we try and do a search warrant when it's most advantageous, where they have, maybe they've re-upped, they have more drugs on their person, more drugs.
And when did you say you introduced the safe harbor laws?
I believe it went into effect last July, a year ago last July.
2021 or 2020?
2020. Is it 2020? Yeah, 2020.
I don't know what time it is either.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, presumably that's part of the outreach plan to like make that more well-known
Yes.
amongst people?
So obviously I can't have my detectives going out and doing that outreach. So we actually rely a lot on our community engagement division, Mark's division, our Mark team. And we also rely on Department of Human Services. So Department of Human Services is really the one that pushes those type of.
And like the schools at all?
Schools are different animal.
Right. I guess
We no longer have school resource officers, so it's more difficult. Schools certainly have drugs in them. I mean, we had this 14-year-old, she goes to Yorktown.
Yeah.
So there are drugs in the schools, and we would love to be more involved in that, because it's a dangerous mix in my opinion.
Yeah.
They're young and not knowing what they're doing, and they think it's okay because it's a pill.
Mm-hmm.
When it really was mixed by somebody who really has nothing to do with it. So
Yeah.
that's the problem is, if it was like typical heroin in a shot, most kids aren't doing that, right? Because they just don't want the shot, but it's a harmless pill. It's just a little bit of pills.
Right. Yeah.
That's the problem.
Are you seeing fake pills?
A lot of fake pills. So they called me M30s, right? Because that's the real version of OxyContin. So they even make them blue. And there's some that are pretty good, and there's some that just look, it's somebody pressed it in their hand or something like that. But yes, we're seeing a lot of those fake pills. We actually had a pill press case in Crystal City. Guy was pressing pills in his apartment. He was part of a larger conspiracy. We were able to take down 3 or 4 people out of that conspiracy.
Where do they get the fake pills? Is that like person-to-person deal, or is it?
A lot of
online
it's mail order. A lot of it's coming from Mexico. The general flow is drugs come through the Mexican border in the western states. They get flown out here to New York, Philadelphia, Washington. Money flows the other direction. So
Do people buy it online, or do they just?
there are some that buy online. We do some package cases. So we work with our partners with FedEx, UPS, United States Postal Service. They'll get a dog will sniff on a package and they'll pull it. And sometimes we can work quickly and say, okay, well, we know, especially if it's an Arlington address, it's going to be delivered to this Arlington address. So we can set up new surveillance.
Mm-hmm.
We even have detectives that have delivered in fake uniforms, like a UPS uniform. So that does happen on occasion. We actually have a part-time task force detective who's on the what's called dark web opioid task force. So they deal in specifically mail order packages over the dark web, and it's the wild west.
So, go ahead. Go ahead.
You were talking about the data exchange with DHS and other agencies. Is there any coordination with like the hospitals and pharmacies locally to sort of see where there are like a lot of opioid prescriptions being issued?
We do have officers that are trained in prescription fraud.
Okay.
So there is a prescription database. Our biggest issue is with fake pills, because prescription pills are expensive. People can buy fake pills at a fraction of the real pills. So we've had a couple of cases where of false scripts and that kind of stuff, but we get more bang for our buck from the fake stuff that we see on the black market.
And then I have one other question. In one of my ride-alongs, one of the things the officer commented on is that like when someone runs away, typically they have either drugs on them, a gun on them, or a warrant, but that recently they've seen like all 3. But that's
We have seen a lot of guns recently, in the last probably 12 to 18 months. Guns and drugs are hand in hand. There are enhanced penalties if we get a drug dealer who has a good amount of drugs on them in a weapon. But yeah, we have seen an uptake in guns.
I was gonna ask what you guys anticipate or, how it affects your ability to sort of monitor these things where marijuana would be legally sold. Is that helpful or disruptive?
It's a little disruptive because, for years and years we had dogs that could sniff that stuff. And, now those dogs are no longer good to us because we can't stop and we can't search based on a sniff for marijuana. So we're retraining our dogs to do the felony drugs. Personally, I don't like it. I just think it's just going to muddy the waters. People are going to not know what's legal and what is legal, and they're going to maybe cross the line. And personally, I think marijuana is a gateway drug. It can lead to bigger things. But I mean, the legislation is what it is. It's coming. We're going to have to deal with it. But
Sure.
And really, where we're seeing the most complaints, it's not so much through my unit, but people that live next to somebody that uses, particularly in a apartment environment. And there's really nothing you can do about that because it's legal to use in your own residence.
Marijuana.
Thank you.
Marijuana, yes. Yeah. And that's the problem with marijuana is you smoke it, you smell it everywhere. Sure. They have gummies too, but
But some apartment
So we talked about the youth trend, and you talked about this partnership with the AARI, and somehow I see the schools, so can you just comment on when we had and I'm not for or against SROs, I'm just asking a factual question. When you had the SROs, was there a little bit better connectivity from the school level?
absolutely.
With this problem?
Absolutely. Yes.
Because I really feel like that, I mean, the ARI is good, but that school piece is critical. So anyway, that answered that question there. With the SROs, you had another plug, information.
Information, and you had relationships.
And relationships.
SROs built with the students, right? They know the ones that are
Exactly.
They know the ones that are using. So we don't have those eyes on anymore.
Don't have those anymore.
So we have to kind of go from ground zero.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is my personal opinion. I thought it was a huge mistake to take the SROs out. I think that was a great program.
I think with this problem and what you said about this youth thing, it's kind of a no-brainer, but here again, that's not, we have to operate within the rules.
Sure.
Can you talk about thresholds a little bit? And I'll kind of caveat this on one of my ride-alongs. I don't know if they briefed you on it, but they got from one of the scans, they got a hit on a car that was carjacked in Maryland 4 days prior. And so we set up a little thing. So this was hot. And we were preparing for when these guys came out of the bowling alley, but we were following a car and there was like marijuana smell. I had to cover my mouth because, but what we talked about in the car, chief, was thresholds and the officers have, discretion. I mean, there's not this black and white thing. Okay, marijuana, boom, go fine. So, and I imagine we talked about the shortages and things, which was kind of a common thing from talking to many people, whether it was because of them or officers that we have at the hospital with mental health and everything. There are a lot of challenges, but you guys do a great job. So getting back to thresholds, it sounds like that your radar is trying to get the big fish, trying to get the seller. Individual users, do you find that unless there's some crime involved or some extenuating circumstances that you're going to go after just a user, a user of cocaine?
Generally, we want the user to get to the distributor.
Okay.
Yeah. So especially my unit, I mean, we're working on complex cases.
Yeah.
To the point where they're, over the course of the year, it could be a couple of kilos of whatever it is, heroin, cocaine. I mean, we had one case, it was just literally half a kilo in one stop. So those are the people that we're after.
Okay.
The users, we recognize they're going to need treatment. So we still need to hold them accountable because we don't want them to go back. I mean, that's part of the reason why the drug dealers are coming, because we have these users. But we realize that treatment is probably a better option for them, and then hopefully cooperation to help us get to the next level.
Okay.
Yeah, so definitely looking for
looking up. So an individual person may not be that you're, hey, let's go lock this guy up, whatever. You're more interested in making that contact and getting him treatment, him or her treatment, versus locking him up for, for years. Because you want to get up to the higher.
Yes, the dealers are the ones that are more dangerous. They're the ones carrying the guns because they want to protect their investment. They're carrying lots of money, that kind of thing. They have disagreements with their competitors, so that's where the danger comes in.
Yeah. Do you guys have policy on it, or is this more individual discretion of the officers?
Well, there's discretion on the misdemeanor level.
On the misdemeanor level.
If it's a felony drug, you have to be.
Okay, got it.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Sorry, no ride-alongs in my.
All right, Lieutenant Walker.
Hi, good evening. I'm Damon Washington, Lieutenant. I've been with the police department for 26 years. I work in the criminal investigation section, which is CIS. There are a lot of disciplines within that section. And I know that you guys were afforded a video from Lieutenant Paula Chavis explaining what the criminal investigation section was, how many people were there, 46 detectives, 6 supervisors, 1 captain and 1 deputy chief, or the captain and his 7 years also as a deputy chief. The different sections in there are separated from property crimes and people crimes. So on the property crime side, you have the units of the burglary unit, auto crimes, financial crimes, and all those units are supervised by 1 supervisor, 1 lieutenant. Then you also have my side, which is the tactical unit, which is on that side, and then the warrant section, which I supervise those 2 sections. And then on the people crime side, you have a special victims unit, which is supervised by 1 lieutenant, and the homicide robbery unit, which is supervised by 1 lieutenant. And just the names of each unit is you can kind of garnish what kind of cases they investigate. They investigate those cases within that matter. My unit I will speak specifically about, and I'll answer any questions. I know that you guys saw that video. I watched it. It was really informative. So if you have any questions about any specific unit or something that I don't cover, please feel free to just go and ask. So the unit that I supervise is a tactical unit and a warrant unit. I'll talk about the warrant unit first. So the warrant unit has 2 individuals, 1 detective there. We also have another vacancy and then an admin. And what they do is they manage all the warrants that come into the police department, ensure that they're appropriate and checked. They do audits on the warrants to ensure that the information is correct. Send back audit information back to the state police, who manages all the warrants and stuff, the CIC entries. And then our warrant detective goes out and actively tries to get people, of course, people to come in and turn themselves in for the outstanding warrants. Now, those who don't turn themselves in for the outstanding warrants, they generally come over to me for the tactical unit. And the tactical unit is also a covert plainclothes unit. We don't drive our vehicles. I normally don't wear a shirt like this. I put this shirt on for you guys today. So hopefully you like it. At the request of Captain. I tried to get a haircut, but I wasn't changing the chance to get that. We also drive rental cars, and then some of our cars are outfitted with emergency equipment too when we have to do tactical stops. Just as you spoke about that, when you did your ride along, sir, and you were at a bowling alley and that car that was carjacked, my unit was called in for that incident, and we actually worked that incident. So those are the type of crimes or level of crimes that we work. We do some investigative work prior to going out and doing any investigations or any kind of surveillance apprehensions for individuals. Very proud of the unit. We had I was explaining to him last week, we had a very productive week last week. We do work well with our regional partners, DC, Maryland Police Departments, Fairfax, Falls Church, Alexandria, on a regular basis. Case in point, last week, there was the very unfortunate incident that Fairfax had where the young lady was murdered in her apartment. That individual actually resided here in Arlington, and we worked together in a joint venture to get that person in the custody within hours of that infraction. Another one happened before also. I think it happened in Falls Church, where the individual allegedly committed a violent crime against a doctor in his house while his wife was there. That too, we worked with our regional partners because he resided in Arlington to also get that person in the custody within hours of that crime. So we work well with all our regional partners, sharing information and our assets and our resources.
What is y'all's data sharing like? Is that pretty ad hoc, or is there centralized system that's more
Well,
built out.
most of the information or data that we utilize for our investigations, it comes from different kind of law enforcement databases. And the information can only be used for law enforcement purposes. And they run the gamut of Akron, where you can just get general information from personnel about, addresses of phone. There's also Links, which is a COG run database system that allows you to access different police departments, RMS systems, record management systems. Now, these databases alone, you cannot act on the information to go arrest somebody. You have to verify the information that you get, especially from Links. Links is almost like your friend or your brother or your cohort in another department. I call him up, hey, are you familiar with this address or with this person? He may say, yes, I had a case with him last year. Here's his name or date of birth, or this is the information that I know about that. I can't arbitrarily utilize that information to run to the magistrate and get a warrant. I have to verify whatever information that is given to me by some other entities and then move forward with that.
I will say, we actually work very
Oh, yeah.
closely with the tactical unit. We actually develop a suspect and we have a search warrant or arrest warrant, or we need to follow. That's what his group does very well. We also do a lot of threat assessments. So, threat assessments that are vetted through senior officers, senior detectives, and then through supervisors, because you want to make sure the information you have is correct, right? So the thing that keeps me up at night is that we give information to these guys, or we give information to SWAT if it reaches that threat level, and we got the wrong house or the wrong car. We can't have that, right? We have to make sure that we're digging into that information and verifying it. We put eyes on the house, right? We put eyes on the suspect that came out of that apartment, so we know that we're 100% sure that that's who we're after. That's the house we want to hit. That's the car we want to stop, and all that's spelled out in a threat assessment. And we use that threat assessment on how we're going to address this person, right? So they have a history. They've been convicted of homicide. They've been known to carry guns, right? That's going to get a higher threat matrix and a higher response from us than somebody who has a couple parking tickets or something like that, right? So that's where we really have good information sharing is on those threat matrices.
And that threat matrix is part of an operational plan that's required by everyone. So any operation that any member of the tactical unit does, we do an operational plan. So there's also a backtrack in that. So if someone comes back and says, hey, what happened with this operation? Why'd you make the decision that you did? We can track back to the document that we utilize and the information that we used, which guided our course of action. And that's on something as small as an individual brandishing a firearm at a Safeway because he got in a car accident and arguing with someone, to something larger like a homicide case or a larger robbery case.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
All right. Guys.
Thank you. Thanks for having
We
us.
really
thank you.
appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Can we take like 5 and we'll get switched over and you guys can take it before?
Okay, so let me, just to kind of keep us official here, so I'm going to entertain a motion to stand in recess. Right now, it is 7:16, so let's, you guys want to take 9 minutes? Okay, entertain a motion to recess until 7:25. Okay,
I second the motion.
okay, all in favor? Take the recess, aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, 7:25, we'll be back for part 2.
If you're a county employee and haven't signed in yet, just do that. I don't know where the sheet is.
I didn't want to say. Juliet.
Sign up for more birthday.
I was good. She was good, right?
Right. Everybody bail. I'm
Oh, all right. You're in my earring.
Yeah, no problem.
Face to the name, right?
Yes, exactly.
Boom. It wasn't locked in mine.
And how long have you been officially?
Yeah.
On board?
And I was glad to hear that. Well.
Anita, I'm like,
And then you know, you know, that day I was driving, and then I had so when you
They were-
finally
Something that happened in the past.
no, they took me to get hey, they wanted to make sure you
There
were
was-
laughing. Out there.
I stood up there.
And she said, so she said each time that she was walking around and around, she was like seeing where you were. And then it came a point in time where
Very impressive.
but we knew that you were gonna be smart enough to.
Yeah, because I mean, not that it's so much, but I was
No, it wasn't, it was just a matter of us wanting to make sure you were okay. We're waiting for us.
How's it going, Larry?
I did your room. I'm from the Office of Wellness.
Fire department came in and just seen all this.
Surgery.
Ooh,
That's going on right now. I was actually-
All right, so next we have up is our crisis intervention team training. This is Corporal Mark Francis, and I'll let him take it away from here.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Mark Francis. I am currently assigned to the Community Engagement Division here in Arlington County. I've been with this department now since 2017. I came here from a similar sized agency in Huntsville, Alabama, which is in northern Alabama, about a 90-minute drive from Nashville, Tennessee. I started my law enforcement career in 2016. Prior to that, I was a school teacher for a little while. I do have a background in music. My first instrument is piano. Being a product of a Jamaican household, the thing that they do is they like to put you out in front of everybody, and they try to make you do as many things as you possibly can in your short little tenure as a child. I do play multiple instruments, but my primary instrument is piano. I still play that to this day. When I started out with law enforcement in Huntsville, I was part of the recruitment team as well as their incident response team, which it kind of morphed out of what was called their mobile field force, which is basically a larger support unit for our SWAT unit. So basically, we were spread out across all patrol squads, and whenever there was a major incident, we could immediately be deployed because, just like here in our county in Arlington, SWAT takes a little bit longer to deploy. So we would go and we would manage a scene until SWAT was able to take over. Since my time here at ACPD, I have certifications as a general instructor, mobile command bus driver, bike patrol, and most recently as a field training officer, which I'm not using right at this moment because I am not in patrol. But I do plan to go back to patrol soon, and at that time I will utilize that certification. The one that I'm most excited about is mobile command bus, because I first got certified prior to COVID, and now for the first time in 2 days, I get to drive the mobile command bus for the fire department to the county fair. I will have the largest vehicle on the road that nobody can tell me what to do. I'm excited. So I'm looking forward to that. So I have been asked to talk to you. I've been asked to speak with you this evening about crisis intervention, particularly about mental health. I know it's a very hot topic, and particularly how law enforcement has such a deep footprint in mental health. And before I get started, I would really love to hear what are some of your impressions about how how you feel law enforcement should be embedded in mental health within the county, across the country. Do you feel like it's too heavy of a footprint? Do you feel like we need to be able to take a step back? What are your thoughts?
Well, since we're new, mostly we're so much in learning mode, but I've been really encouraged and excited to read about in other places, and then mentioned previously about some of the dual responder model, recognizing that it's difficult. Like, it doesn't feel safe always to approach somebody demonstrating, distress or, other sort of unpredictable behavior, but also that it's not really reasonable necessarily to ask people who have so many other training requirements and job requirements to be, capable of handling all of those situations. So to me, that seems like a really interesting model. But again, just sort of starting to learn about now.
Sure. Anybody else?
Yeah, following up on that, I ideally would think that there'd be more mental health professionals involved and less police involved. But, it's a difficult mix. And I know that there's institutional difficulties, and you can't just snap your fingers and change the institutional boundaries. But I do think that a push in a certain direction is probably a good thing. One of the things that I think a number of us experienced on the ride along was, I saw at least half a dozen officers at Virginia Hospital Center, literally spending their entire shift just standing there because they had to. And I'm not sure how easily that's changed, because there were no beds literally at the sort of fail-safe place where they could go. So literally there was nowhere for them to go. So that's not an easy thing to fix, and that's a little different than the problem you're talking about, but
No, that's exactly what
tied
I'm
into it,
I'm
yeah, I
talking
mean,
about, yeah. And you're absolutely correct. Since having left patrol, I used to do a lot more with mental health calls, and I would even volunteer for the off-duty detail that we have for called alternate transport, where those officers are specifically tasked for. It used to be a 10-hour shift. I think it might have gone up to 12 in some instances now. I think they would actually just welcome the help beyond the actual overtime detail. And there have been times where I remember the longest drive that I've actually had to take with a mental health consumer was down to Southwestern, which is like about a 5.5-hour drive. So if you can imagine having to take somebody 5.5 hours, have to go get them through their intake process, get them completely handed over to the medical facility there, and then drive back. That's a long time. And so, but sometimes those are the lengths that we have to go to just to be able to get a consumer to a bed. I mean, ideally, it would be great to just maybe take everybody out to Fairfax, out to the Institute, or maybe out to Alpha. I think it's Sleepy Hollow or something like that. Right there, out past some Seven Corners out in Fairfax County. I mean, that's probably more ideal, but we're constantly taking consumers to Poplar Springs, and so that's those are longer drives, and it does take a toll on officers. But unfortunately, you're right. It is a larger conversation, and one that we cannot really get away from in terms of taking officers completely out of mental health. I was reading just a few days ago about out in California, where a lot of departments out there are really now taking their officers completely out of mental health calls, up to the point of suicidal subjects. There was a family that had actually requested a welfare check for their relative because he was threatening to kill himself. He had left his sister a very detailed message about coming to pick up the cat and things of that nature. They called the sheriff's office and they said, "I'm sorry, we're not sending anybody out." And when they were able to go out there, the family did go out there to make contact with them, a family friend along with the sister, they found him dead. But it's kind of one of those things where it's like, you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. What is the best approach? Because a lot of departments are concerned about liability when it comes to dealing with mental health patients. What is the liability that we assume when we take on the role of trying to intervene with a consumer that's now in crisis, when that consumer can now turn on us and now we are forced to take action beyond just a conversation, or where de-escalation doesn't work. So that's a huge challenge. So we're going to talk a little bit about that.
Can I comment just real quick on this? I'm unfortunately uniquely skilled at this and have some background in this in Virginia. So my second daughter, probably my smartest daughter, UVA graduate, Stanford Masters, came down with schizophrenia 4 years ago. Lived here in the county, and I called you guys twice on her due to threats and concerns. So there's two problems. I think in the response phase, just me personally, because when somebody makes a threat, I don't know what other agency besides a officer with a badge, can you send the county health person out there? I don't know. And this county has great resources, I'll tell you that. Very great resources. But that initial response, in this role thing, having been a parent and witnessed this, it takes you a lot to call the police on your own daughter, particularly after reading about, I can't remember what city it was, but it was a Vietnam vet that was making some of these, probably schizophrenia, they get very paranoid. The FBI is coming after me. This, Dad, you had a top secret clearance. You know why this is happening. And then that turns into a threat. I'm not trained. So I'll just say that I've called you guys and neighbors called and you responded 3 times. And the first thing I'll say is the training. I know you've got special units and I've watched them in action. So the time and money you're investing in that is well spent, because that same week I read about this Vietnam vet that was making comments and, you know, you know, and you talked about the liability piece. This is tough business. So I don't know the answer, but in the response phase, I think what the county is currently doing, you guys are doing something correct. Diana's fine now. She's living out west, a little further from the FBI here. But in any case, I just want to share on that side of it. My personal thing is because it's a delicate balance between safety and threats. And I don't know about sending in just a county person. They might be better trained on the mental piece, but mental health piece. But I think that threat nexus, I don't know. I don't, because I wanted to make sure everybody was safe. It was right for that officer to be, no matter how hard that was. So that's just what I'd say. And then on the other piece, like we talked about, I think there's a better way to the care and taking in the hospital safety. I don't know if it's getting, I was going to talk to you offline, Chief, about maybe there's some legislation or something in the state where they can get retired officers that can get, you know, people that are credentialed to maintain safety and order and then drive them to the closest hospital. That's a different skill set to me, but it's that initial, you know, threat. What do you do? Sure. And one of my ride-alongs, I had the best ride-along, I would say best, but we responded to a brother and a mother that called in a suicide threat on a kid. And so 2 officers went there. My guy was secondary and we went in. They brought me up there too. And I was watching you guys work with this guy and talk to him. And whatever your training, Chief, is really here. And I don't know a lot, but I was impressed with the level of training. And maybe that you can comment at the end. What does the average ACPD officer get? Because I know you have the special unit, but it seems like you guys give basic training to everybody.
We are going to talk.
Okay.
I will. There's a slide in here that actually talks about our curriculum.
Okay.
So we will definitely get into that.
Okay.
I do appreciate the way in which you were able to be vulnerable and transparent about this, because I think it's, when we talk about mental health, I think that we all in some way can have a personal connection to it, whether it's through immediate family, whether it's through something that we've gone through personally. I'll be very transparent. I've dealt with my own struggles. You know, I see a therapist regularly, and I'm not ashamed to say it. And I hated it at first, and we're going to talk about cultural differences. And because coming out of a West Indian home, that's not something that is normally done. We don't talk about mental health. We don't talk about mental health illness. In very conservative backgrounds, we pray everything away. You go to church and you talk to Jesus. You don't talk to a therapist. You know, there's no reason for that. You have no reason to be upset. You have no reason to be sad because you know God. But that's not reality. So I've had to deal with it as well with my own son. You know, he has a mental health diagnosis. He's thriving, but it was hard as a father so I can identify to be in that same situation where now, even though I had been to hundreds of mental health calls, that now what do I do for my own son? And I was lost. I was in a fog in that moment. So that's why when I became a general instructor and I did my apprenticeship to actually be completely certified, I actually decided to do my apprenticeship with the CIT team that trains our officers and other people outside of ACPD, just because I felt very much convicted that this is something that is needed. And to me, it's rewarding. Our CIT program was actually started back in 2008 along DHS. It is a recognized program. There are different models, but we'll talk about the model briefly that our program is modeled after, which is the Memphis model. And so,
what is that called? Which model?
The Memphis model. I'll share a little bit about why that is. Our CIT program is not just for officers. We've had magistrates attend. We have people from ECC that attend our CIT training. From other agencies, we've had federal partners. At the time that I went through CIT here with ACPD, I was there with, I think, some officers from the CIA police force. from their uniform police presence that they have at the CIA campus. So this is something, and don't get me wrong, the tools that we learn are not just going to be mental health centric. We can use them outside of mental health. A lot of the tools that we use, the techniques, the de-escalation, it could be used on a domestic. It could be used with an irate person that maybe that is in a dispute with a tenant landlord dispute. Maybe somebody that felt that they got cheated out of money or out of services at a restaurant or at a store. These are techniques that can be used across the board, but it does kind of fall very much in line with the CIT model. So some historical considerations, as you can see up here, there are currently only about 43,000 mental health care beds in the US today, or about 860 per state. But when you look at that second statistic, it talks about over 27 million adults that are going untreated. That's just untreated. Think about the numbers that are actually receiving treatment. And there are many reasons why some are going untreated. I mean, it could be cultural, it could be stigma. It could be that they tried to, but they were denied services. You guys remember Creed Deeds, his son, Gus, they tried to get services for him. And this was before the revamped ECO process. And I think at the time that it was a 6-hour hold, and they were unable to get a bed for him. And they had to take him home, and he was going through crisis at that time. Well, the next day, Creed Deeds was out taking care of the horses. Gus came out and he stabbed him several times, and he was badly injured. And then, of course, we know that tragically Gus went off deeper or back towards the house, I think it was, but he ended up shooting and killing himself. So he did not receive the treatment that he needed at a time when he was in crisis. So how many people do we know? How many consumers are actually, maybe wanting help, but then they're getting turned away because there are just no resources available? Yes.
Do you typically get a sense from an incoming call what level of mental health crisis is incoming? I mean, is that a thing where you just can't tell?
Sometimes I think
because I could sort of, I mean, ideally, and look, there's no easy answer to this, but I mean, if there would be a way to sort of somehow through training designate this is something that it could be very serious or less serious, but maybe that's not something that you can distinguish up front.
Sometimes you can. And I think it really just a lot of times depends on the amount of information that is received.
Yeah.
Which is part of the reason why even our call takers, people in ECC, they take this training, because it allows them to be able to try to even connect with the person over the phone. Sometimes it might be the person that's in crisis that's calling. Sometimes it could be a family member. How much information are we able to get to actually place into that call? The more information we have up front, the better equipped we are going into it. But I'm sure, as you guys realize during your ride-alongs, a call that's dispatched may not always be what you get when you get there. So there it is a balancing act. And to kind of go back, if I've personally talked to people that have now since left DHS that said that they're not necessarily comfortable going out and dealing with a person that's in crisis. They would much rather have the police go out there. So I mean, granted, we say as part of their job, but their job is to be able to actually deal with the person when the threat is kind of neutralized, when there is really not the threat of immediate violence. When you're talking about somebody that maybe has that is threatening to hurt themselves and they have a gun or they have a knife, I don't know that a mental health professional that is unarmed is going to necessarily feel safe going into a situation like that. So that is why this training is important, because it hopefully helps to reduce the use of force that we have to employ in a situation like this, and hopefully we can de-escalate through words. But de-escalation is not a panacea. It's not a magic pill. We hope that it works, and I think I can speak comfortably for ACPD personnel in saying that nobody wants to go out there and have to take a life. So we want to be able to go out there and to be able to de-escalate these situations through words and, through our demeanor, through empathy and things of that nature without having to use force. I think that is the ultimate goal with each and every call that we go off for mental health.
Sorry. sometimes I think like there are probably people who have like specific vulnerabilities to, let's just say, police presence, right? Like if they've had bad encounters in the past, or maybe just like fears around it, or maybe they grew up in a particular demographic that they feel is targeted by police officers, or even just like, you know, what people see in the media as well. I'm sure it can drive like a lot of fears. I mean, I've never had an interaction, you know, like a intense or negative interaction with a police officer, but I imagine that if I was in a mental health crisis, I could possibly be triggered, you know, like to think that maybe I'm not going to come out of the situation safe, or, you know, maybe I would be harmed, or, you know, something like that. So I was just wondering, what kind of like training do you guys have that specifically might address any sort of like particular vulnerabilities around a police officer responding, just like the mere presence, right? Like you haven't done anything to specifically trigger that person or make them feel unsafe, but maybe just your mere presence as an armed police officer in that situation. How do you respond to that?
Some of it is going to come through training, and some of it is just going to really be about your own experience. Sometimes you have to be able to fight hard to be able to get through that barrier. You know that you're there for a reason, and then you have to then determine at that point, do I really have an obligation to stay here? And if I do, then what can I do beyond the training that I have to make that connection? For me, I know that personally, if I go and I talk to somebody, I'm very open to a point. I'm not going to give them all the dirt, but I'm very open about just my own personal experiences, and a lot of times that will be enough to just kind of help to break down that wall. And I know that we do have a lot of younger officers, but I think that one of the things, and I think that anybody here would probably agree, and staff, that life experience a lot of times can really trump training when you go onto a lot of these calls of this nature, because it's, take a domestic, for instance, it's kind of hard to connect with a couple that's going through something if you've actually never been through a tough relationship yourself. You don't really have anything to draw from, and the training will only do but so much to help you make that connection. CIT and deal with mental health consumers is really about making a connection. The training that we receive is to give us the tools to help make the connection. It's not necessarily, it is about tactics, because we don't train CIT to trump safety. Officer safety is always going to be paramount, but this is really about giving them tools. This is about giving them vocabulary. This is about giving them verbiage to use, ways to be able to articulate what they're thinking, and to be able to help to get through to that person, so that you're not looking to solve their problems. We're not mental health professionals. What we are trying to do is to get them from a place of crisis to a place of decision, where they're willing to go either voluntarily, or we can even get them to go involuntarily, but non-combatively to services. That's really the end goal. We can't solve a person's problems overnight. We can't solve it in the matter of a call. The most that we can do, and the best outcome that we can hope for, is to make a connection with them so that we can get them to the trained professionals.
Is that something that you feel, sorry, just two follow-up questions. Is that something that you all encounter a lot, in terms of just feeling like your presence in responding to a mental health call might be triggering to a particular person that you're responding to?
In this county, I would say no, and I would probably say that's just because of what you alluded to earlier. Having worked for two departments, I would say that the level of professionalism and the level of training that actually goes into our officers so that they can handle these types of calls has equipped us so that each interaction sets the subsequent officer up for success. We have that more than not. We don't really have as many incidents where they've had such a negative experience that they don't want to deal with this. And even in those moments, you have some officers that are just really good at being able to kind of smooth the waters. Like, hey, look, I get it. You had a really bad experience the last time. Can we start with a clean slate? You don't know me. I don't know you. I want to try to earn your trust. Let's start with them. Let's write a new book. Let's write a new chapter. And sometimes we have to do that. And it might not necessarily even be because they had a bad experience in Arlington. They could have had a bad experience in another jurisdiction. Because when people see us, all they see is the uniform. They
Right.
don't make the distinction between us being Arlington or, or any other jurisdiction. And I'm not shaming any other jurisdiction. All I'm just saying is that, we might sometimes we get the residual of a bad experience that they might have had somewhere else. And we have to do our best to be able to kind of work through that.
I definitely saw that on my ride along, like not the triggering experience, but actually the officer that I was with went in and I think kind of was taking proactive measures to make the person feel comfortable. One of the first things he said when he entered the apartment was, "You did the right thing by calling us. It was really great that you called us for help." I think that just helped kind of like ease that person's tension from the onset. So that was really commendable. And then the other follow-up question I was going to ask was, do you think that a co-responder model would equip you all to better respond in a situation where someone might be triggered by an officer responding to their mental health crisis and being able to kind of like maybe de-escalate that or, give you an opportunity to take a step back a little bit and let them address that concern and you're monitoring safety?
I think it's on a case-by-case basis, because if we have a very dynamic situation that is involving a mental health consumer, you still don't want to take the co-responder with you into that situation until you stabilize it. So you still have to be able to find a way as an officer to stabilize the situation and make it safe before you bring in a co-responder. Just like depending on the nature of the call that you were going to on your ride along, your officer would have had discretion to say, "Hey, I'm going to need you to wait in the car." And until we get the situation stabilized before I pick you up. I think it's going to be the same thing with the co-responder, but I think that it does have benefit. And I think that the moment that you can actually have the co-responder step in and take over, I think it might be good. There may be times where you've already built such a rapport where the co-responder's assistance might not necessarily be needed, except just to facilitate, the ride down to CIC or up to the hospital, or to maybe even do an on-site assessment. I've done the co-responder piece before, particularly while doing the alternate transport detail. I've responded out for mental health calls with somebody from DHS, and it's worked well. But and there have been times where I've been able to get through, and there have been other times where I've had to step back, or it just was not going well. And the responder was able to kind of make headway.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
We can move on to the next slide. So let's talk about some significant incidents that I think really kind of help to shape why CIT is so important. The first incident is going to be from Memphis, Tennessee, and this is where we actually get our model for CIT. This is involving Joseph Dwayne Johnson back in September 24th of 1987. His mother called. He was high on cocaine at the time, and he had threatened people with a knife. Police were called at the time that they were called, and they arrived on scene. He was still holding the knife, and he lunged at them with the knife, and then they shot and killed him. There was an outcry from the community about the way that the police handled that situation. And even though the shooting itself would be considered justifiable, there was still the question of why did he have to die? Why could there not have been, an alternative? Why couldn't there not have been other measures taken to maybe preserve his life? So from that, the Memphis Police Department started to reassess how they handle these mental health calls, and they developed their crisis intervention program down there, and that is a program, and that situation, that incident, and what came out of that is what our model is based on. The second is going to be out of Pinehurst, North Carolina. This is very important to us as officers, not just for CIT, but also for the training that we receive for TASER. Anytime when you go through initial training to actually be TASER certified, and even to recert as a TASER operator. Each time that we go for training, we have to revisit this study. And this is out of Pinehurst, North Carolina, where Armstrong was diagnosed as bipolar and paranoid schizophrenic. He was taken voluntarily to the hospital by his sister, but then he left AMA. And and then he went outside and he was displaying very bizarre behavior. He was like eating grass, cigarette butts, and things of that nature. So a civil commitment order was in process, and there it has to be notarized. So police initially made contact with him, and they were talking and they were trying to build a rapport with him. But once that civil commitment order was stamped and it was notarized, they decided that, okay, time for talk is over. We got to get to a point of decision. Ronald Armstrong ended up wrapping himself around the pole of a stop sign, and they used a taser to drive stun him. I believe it was 5 times. Drive stun just means that rather than actually deploying the probes from the taser, you can actually just make direct contact with the skin of the person, and you can use the taser in that manner. He did not initially die from that. They were able to take him into custody, but he subsequently died, and from what is believed to be a direct correlation with the multiple drive stuns. So that guides a lot of our policy, the way in which we actually use the taser, the circumstances under which we can actually deploy a taser. But it is also important for us in terms of crisis intervention training, because what was the rush? Just because now this civil commitment order was notarized, was there really a rush at that point to just go ahead and take him into custody without trying to work with him a little more? The third case comes out of Huntsville, Alabama. This one is near and dear to me because for all the officers that were involved in this case, I know all of them. Jeffrey Parker called. He threatened to commit suicide, and officers were called out to his home. I'm not going to get into some of the tactical decisions that were made, but ultimately what happened is that the first 2 officers that arrived on scene made contact with him in his home, and he was sitting on his couch with a gun pointed at his head. And they were working to try to build a rapport with him. They were trying to get him to stand down so they could actually take him to the hospital, get him help. The third officer that arrived on scene noticed something out of the ordinary about the way that this whole incident was unfolding. He ran up to the home with a shotgun. And within 11 seconds, I believe it is, I counted, from him reaching the doorstep, he gave verbal commands twice to Jeffrey to drop the gun, and then he shot him and killed him. He was cleared by the shooting review board for HPD, but the DA decided to take it to the grand jury and got a murder indictment, and he was subsequently found guilty of murder, and he is now serving a 25-year sentence. The officer that actually pulled the trigger was somebody that I went to the academy with, wrote many calls together with him. We developed a pretty good relationship. To say that he's a stone cold killer, you could never convince me of that. I think that he made a decision based off of the information that he had, but I would never paint him to be a killer. The other 2 officers, Justin, him and my brother, were class officers together in high school for their senior class. Ganesha was somebody that we actually drove and rode the same zone together. I probably ran more calls when I worked for HPD with her than anybody else. She even actually potentially saved my life on a separate suicidal subject call where medics were in the house before we got there, and we did not know that this gentleman still had a gun on him, and he almost pulled it on me. And she immediately reacted and put hands on him and cut the gun out of his hand. So I know all 3 of those officers very well. Out of this particular case, HPD had no CIT training. They had no CIT program prior to this shooting. They actually did get a program in place, but at the time, it was still voluntary. Ours is not. Every officer here has to go through CIT training. To my knowledge, I can't tell you whether or not they've gone to a mandatory platform for CIT there with HPD, but the last that I checked, it was still voluntary.
In that case, was the decedent pointing the gun at his own head, right?
Pointing the gun at his own head, yes. So for like I said, I don't want to get into the weeds a lot, the tactics and everything like that. But, the argument was, action is faster than reaction. And as quickly as that gun was pointed to his own head, it could have been just as quickly pointed to one of the officers. And that was, that was a large part of the defense. So, as you know, we deal with a lot of mental health here in Arlington. So much so that we have several disposition codes for mental health calls. These codes are whenever, and I'm pretty sure you guys heard it when you were in your ride-alongs. Whenever an officer would clear a call, he or she would use a 3-digit number, maybe a 304, a 306, or a 301. Maybe you even heard some of these, 904, 901. So these are all the codes that we use to deal with calls that have to do with mental health. The first one, if we go to a call, if we get dispatched to a call and it's just a minor incident, let's just say that somebody, they're just having a bad day and the only thing they could think to do is call the police. Talk to them, determine that there is no immediate need for services. There's no threat to themselves. There's no danger to themselves or to anybody else. It's just a minor, they're just having a bad day. We might clear it 901. 902, field investigation report. This may be where we have a little bit more of a significant incident. Maybe let's say you have an individual that is he's just running around. He's not doing anything illegal, but he's scaring a lot of people in the neighborhood. He's just making a lot of erratic statements. And, you figure, this may be somebody that we need to watch for later on down the line. You may decide that you want to document this because you kind of get that feeling that this might be somebody we might run into again later on. So you want to have some information on file. We would do what's called a field investigation report. It's an internal document for ACPD. Still doesn't rise to the level of necessarily needing services, but we're going to still go ahead and document this. So we would clear that call 902. 903 would be when we have successfully negotiated a person in crisis and they decide that they want to voluntarily go to the hospital. We would do this when we feel as though that, maybe they have support, maybe they have a family member that's going to go with them. Perhaps they're already maybe they already have a case opened up with DHS, they already have a caseworker, or maybe they have a private therapist, and I'll go to the hospital. I'm probably going to give the therapist a call too. If we take somebody voluntarily up to the hospital, we would document it, but we would clear the case 903 or that call for service 903. All these disposition codes are important and because it gives us a way to be able to track how we are actually handling our calls for service when it comes to mental health. 904 is becoming a lot more prevalent for us now because we're having to deal with a lot more ECOs. I know that there was a time when I first got here, like I think it was said earlier, you might have maybe 1 or 2 a week. And we talked about this earlier today, but now sometimes you might have, like you said, you saw 5 or 6 officers up at the hospital, all with ECOs, emergency custody order. And for those, you have to write a case report. If you take somebody to the hospital and you have deprived them of their rights, their 4th Amendment rights, they are no longer free to leave. You've now taken them into custody. We have to document that. And to do so, we would write a case report. We would clear it as 904. Does everybody know what EDP stands for? Emotionally disturbed person. Okay. So that's what. So where you see EDP, that's how we refer to a lot of the mules when our calls are dispatched. Sometimes we'll say known EDP, or maybe this person sounds EDP on the phone. Sometimes we can pick that up. So to answer your question earlier, how do we gauge the level of response? Sometimes we know if it's a known EDP, like, okay, what do they want today? Sometimes they just want you to come out there and just talk to them. And they don't know any other avenue except to call 911. So, but that's what EDP is.
So is there a routine oversight of this process? You talk about the custody thing and the legal thing is really important on this. Is there a regular state kind of oversight of this process that you guys, obviously you're trying to make sure you're cross the T's, dot the I's in this? Is it something that routinely people are coming in with a magnifying glass, making sure that you're cross the T's and dot the I's? Or is it only if one of these people has a lawyer and they get lawyered up because they don't like this process, and they come in and, you know, one by one go and get the magnifying glass?
So there's no automatic review.
There's no-
External, but every time, like Mark said, every police report that's written has to be reviewed by a supervisor to make sure that we're thorough, complete, and we did what we're supposed to do.
Okay.
When you're talking about ECOs and TDOs, there's judicial process that has to issue for that to happen. So, you know, the DHS worker talks to the magistrate who issues the ECO.
Yeah.
Or TDO, they have to issue the TDOs. ECOs can be either paper or paperless.
Yeah.
But all that is reviewed by the independent magistrate to make sure that they find that there's a reason to continue to hold somebody. So there are checks
That
and
independent
balances.
magistrate is a county
They're
person?
really, they work in Arlington, they're actually state.
They're state. Okay, that's what I was wondering. I thought it would be state.
And then we get personnel complaints occasionally, which would cause an independent review of the entire circumstances.
Okay, so if a mentally ill patient there, one of those people wants to file a complaint,
Absolutely. And we would investigate it.
so that might be something that comes to us too, right? Okay, that's kind of where I was going with this. I was wondering. So that's good, we're getting this training.
Here on this slide, this graphic will show you our calls for service for mentally ill patient or consumers. The caveat to this is that these numbers are going to be based off of calls that are initially dispatched as a known mental health call. So maybe like an attempted suicide, or somebody calling and saying that, or somebody calling because they're in crisis, or a family member saying, you know, my daughter or my son is off their medication, and you know they're having an episode today. That's what these calls are. So as you can see, our numbers are fairly consistent. Our biggest jump was in 2020, and I think that we probably can all figure out why that was. All across the country, maybe even across the globe, you know, mental health cases spiked because of COVID during that first year, and then they kind of started to, even though we're not really out of COVID, we're managing it now, and things are kind of starting to get back down to the numbers that we're typically accustomed to. But these numbers don't necessarily paint the fullest picture. I read in the British Journal of Psychology that some of the most common offenses committed by mentally ill persons are going to be like assault, theft, robbery, shoplifting, alcohol or drug-related charges, and trespassing. So what that says is that we could be dispatched to the CVS over here for a misdemeanor larceny, where they don't necessarily want to prosecute. You know, it's just a small, you know, maybe they took a pack of gum, or, you know, they took some toiletries or whatnot. But this is also a person that is in need of mental health services. So it got dispatched as a larceny. It's not going to be captured in this particular graphic. But what could happen out of that is that we may end up offering this person services. We may say, okay, this person demonstrates a need where they're not able to take care of themselves. It may be a potential danger to somebody else or to themselves. So we might do a paperless ECO, as Chief was talking about earlier, because we do have paper and paperless ECOs. The paper ECOs are going to be what are issued by the magistrate. The paperless ECO means that we have three-prong criteria that we use to determine whether or not we are going to deprive that person of their freedom to take them to the hospitals, whether they're a danger to themselves, to others, or if they have demonstrated an inability to take care of themselves. And out of that, if they meet any of those three prongs, we can take them and we can refer them for services. So any of these calls could potentially generate a mental health component.
Probably track that, right? How many ECOs there are? I mean, or you could.
Yes, we do track that, and we also have We also do what's called a CIT supplement. With each, anytime that we have like an ECL in the hospital, and anybody that comes into contact with that individual would also would have to do one of those supplements. How that information is actually tracked or how it's actually cataloged, that I'm not sure of, but I do know that that is documentation. Yes.
I happen to have it. I can pull it up and let you know in a minute.
Oh, okay.
All right. So we can move to the next slide. So what is crisis intervention designed to do? It is designed to divert mental health consumers from the criminal justice system when appropriate. Sometimes it is appropriate to arrest a subject, and then we can actually secure services for them through the jail. The ACDF, Arlington County Detention Facility, they actually do have a DHS component there at the jail. So I have personally taken somebody to booking, and what happens is that on the booking sheet, there is a box that you can check. Are there mental health concerns? Once you have spoken with the booking deputies, they can then notify the on-call DHS staff person there at the jail, and they can come down and they can determine at the appropriate time what if any services may be needed. Like I said, we're not mental health professionals, so our threshold is just going to be based off of our training and experience, maybe any behaviors that person was displaying. If we know for a fact that this person is off their medication, we'll convey that information. They'll make the decision, but what it does, at least for us, it kind of takes some of the burden of the liability off of us as officers, because we have now done our due diligence. We have a little bit of discretion and leeway when it comes to misdemeanor crimes as to whether or not we are going to arrest a person versus actually taking them to jail. But if it's a felony, then we shall make an arrest, and then at that point, we can still get them referred for services, but we still have to take them through the booking process. Mental health provides treatment that enables mentally ill persons to become stabilized and to work toward recovery. CIT training, it helps to reduce the risk of injury, both to officers and to the consumer. The better that we're able to communicate with our mental health consumers, maybe it helps to reduce the chance that we have to go hands-on and have a use of force incident. And so we love that, and I'm sure the supervisors love that too, because then that's just less paperwork for them. It also it's supposed to reduce the time officers spend on mental health calls for service. However, while that is a very desirable outcome, that is not always the case. But for me personally, and I think for a lot of other officers, I'd much rather spend the time needed to be able to try to bring it to resolution than to try to force an outcome where we might end up getting what happens in that third box, where you have a risk of injury or something even worse, like what they experienced down in Huntsville. Mental illness in the criminal justice system. Nationally, adults with untreated mental illness make up 1 in 10 calls for police service. 1 in 4 of all fatal police encounters involve an adult with untreated mental illness. 1 in 5 of all jail and prison inmates as an adult with untreated mental illness, that's going to be about 20%. So the percentages themselves might not necessarily seem very big, but when you consider the number of people that means that you come in contact with per day, and there's some days where as a patrol officer, the vast majority of your calls for service that day could potentially just involve somebody that is that has a mental health history. So you were asking about the training that we received. So this is going to outline the CIT curriculum. So the way that it works for us here at ACPD, all of our officers, of course, they go through basic academy. They do not receive this training in the academy. This is training that they receive once they've completed a field training. So once they've gone through the field training program and they've successfully completed that, and they are now a solo officer, they will go through CIT. And it is a 40-hour course. It's over the span of 5 days. This outlines all of the topics that are going to be typically discussed during that week. A lot of it towards the end of the week becomes very interactive. But there is a significant classroom portion where there is a lot of lecturing because there is a lot of information to digest. The idea with CIT is not to make us mental health professionals, and I can't stress that enough. We are not mental health professionals. Some days we do kind of feel that way, and we sometimes even feel like experts because now I actually know more about medications than I ever did before. You just start to know after a while. So are you on the medications? And you're like, yeah, I take Zoloft. All right, cool. So it's you just start because of the sheer volume of calls that we go on where we have to actually know about this stuff. So some of the portions of CIT that I just wanted to highlight. If you see out here on the left column, the consumer perspective, at some point during the week, we actually have consumers, actual mental health consumers that will come in and speak to the officers about their experiences, having gone through, having been interacted with by law enforcement on a call for service. It's very eye-opening. Some of those individuals have actually gone on to work with DHS. I do remember one year we actually had somebody that was, I forgot exactly what her position was or what her title was, but she was a former mental health consumer, and now she actually does do work, whether it's ad hoc or whether she is an actual employee of DHS. She does work. I think I see your hand. Yes.
Go on.
Okay. So that is always that is very enlightening, and I think it's very important that we actually hear from the people that we are going to be potentially dealing with. Emergency services. Just above that is probably going to be the component of Department of Human Services that we deal with the most. Emergency services is going to be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Their extension is 5160. We all know that like the back of our hand. Yeah, exactly. So we can, there is somebody in ES day and night. Whenever we have somebody that we are dealing with on a call for service, a mental health consumer, sometimes we will call them. Typically, especially if we're going to take them for an ECO, we have to notify emergency services because they're going to be the ones that are going to facilitate the assessment. Especially if we take them on a paperless ECO, we can only go off of our training and experience and whether or not what we have meets one of the 3 prongs. They are going to do the assessment. There are some cases in which we have taken a person on an ECO, they assess that person and they're like, we're going to release them from the ECO. We assume there is no liability for us because we have actually done our due diligence as long as we can articulate that. And of course, when we do that, it's still going to be documented. We're still going to do a case report, even if they are released from that ECO. So in that case report, we have to, a good officer is going to notate why it is that they decide to take that person into custody. If DHS decides that they disagree with our assessment and they release that person from the ECO, the liability is going to be on them. Okay.
Real quick.
Yes.
All right. I see how this might be functionally different, but is there associated or other training for working with folks who are sexual assault or domestic violence victims?
So we do receive like roll call training. We do get some of that we'll get during basic academy, but we do get training occasionally, like in terms of like resources that are available. Doorways will sometimes come down and they will speak to us. They have a plethora of resources for domestic violence victims. Right there at the bottom, on the right side, special populations autism. We've actually had people come into roll call to speak specifically about autism awareness, autism training, to give us, to give us tools and to help us kind of, recognize, teach us how to deal with the autistic population, because it is a very unique and special group. What we perceive as aggression from the average person is just really their baseline. And while it can sometimes it could pose a safety risk, we still have to be able to recognize it and to be able to address it accordingly. So there is training that we can receive outside of CIT. And it's just very specific to the needs of the department.
You know, Julie's question is really important, and I guess what I would ask Captain Chamberlain is maybe in some of our other trainings, if we can kind of get exposed to these other crises, you know,
Yeah,
the
so-
training, and so like this right here, I mean, is really outstanding. I've got emergency numbers. It was a hotline in my phone, and it's still there. But was this training, this curriculum, based off the Memphis model? Did you guys take that and then adapt this to Arlington County?
So our current CIT model is based off of the Memphis model. I'm not familiar with the Memphis model in total, so I'm pretty sure that there was some adaptation there, particularly when it comes to the laws, because there's still laws that are going to be different in Tennessee versus Virginia in terms of how we operate within the mental health system. So there's always going to be some differences, but the foundational principles are going to be extracted from that.
Did you say this training is for, it's not for every officer? Or
It is for
it
every
is
officer.
Okay.
It is for every officer. Now, what has happened is that because of COVID, because this is in person, you know, so our I guess you could call it our mandatory training, our core training, were things that we tried to keep up during COVID, but a lot of other training we kind of had to table. A big part of the reason why we had to table CIT training is because this involves more than just ACPD instructors. We have people coming in from all other departments, from the private sector, from hospitals, from legal. So it's a massive undertaking, and because of that, our percentages have gone down. I'm not exactly sure what our percentages are now, but prior to COVID, we were pretty much like almost at 100%. We were very much in the high 90s.
But the goal is everybody at some point will go through this.
Correct. So we are working towards getting our officers that have not been trained in CIT back into the classroom. It has been a little bit of a process, but once we kind of opened up from COVID, we have had a few classes that have gone through.
Thanks.
There's set up to where officers, when they complete field training, they're out on their own for 6 months. When the next class completes field training, the group that's been on their own for 6 months will go to CIT. Okay. So, you know, we have work to do to catch up, like he's explaining, but at some point in the future, we keep this model up, we'll be at or near 100%.
In regards to what you were saying also on the additional training, it's our soft skills training, a lot of things that teach us how to communicate with victims of crimes, to understand cultural differences, understanding the needs base for things to ask, things not to say in the course of a special victims sexual assault type of situation. So a lot of that training, it's throughout every soft skills piece that you'll get a little bit more to work a little bit more on your IPC. Thank you.
And of course, Captain Chambers just touched on cultural diversity. That's a big part of what we discussed during CIT, because every culture handles mental health differently. And as I explained earlier, even with my own upbringing, my own background, you know, coming from a Caribbean household. Now, I was fortunate because my father actually left blue collar work and decided to go into social work, and eventually, you know, he did get his master's in social work, and he is a licensed clinical therapist. So, you know, he kind of broke the mold in our immediate household in terms of kind of, you know, knocking down that stigma, knocking down that barrier. So everyone in our home and even parts of our extended family is very comfortable, you know, in embracing, you know, the challenges of mental health. But there are going to be many cultures, you know, even if whether it's cultural, whether it's religious or whatever it is, you know, we have to deal with it, and we have to be able to find a way to be able to connect with that person and understand why it is that maybe they might be apprehensive to receiving services, or what can we do to really help facilitate that. And then the last thing, and then we'll move on, is just the role playing. That's a huge part of what we do. The last 3 days, we take a part of that day to actually do role plays. The first day is going to be basic, then we kind of ramp it up. We do intermediate role plays. The last day is going to be advanced role playing, where we have to put into practice a lot of the techniques that we're learning through de-escalation. the coaching plays that we use. They're called the 4 coaching plays, which is basically to get the consumer's name, to introduce yourself, to be able to label their emotion, and then to paraphrase. Those are the key components of being able to interact with a person while they're in crisis and hopefully get them to a place of decision. Some of the CIT training concepts, the biggest thing is stigma. You know, I've only been in this profession now since 2016, so it's going to be very difficult for me to be able to speak to what it was like prior to that time in terms of dealing with law enforcement and what law enforcement's perception of mental health. But there has, just as much as we have to be able to dispel a lot of the myths within society, we have to be able to do so internally. If we're the ones that are going out there and we are trying to triage and facilitate services for individuals that are in crisis, we have to be able to kind of work past stigma. And because if not, they can sense it. We treat people that are in crisis as though somehow they have some sort of deficiency in that they're not smart. These folk are smart. And they can smell you a mile away when you're being disingenuous. And you know, so the idea that we can just go in there and just kind of fake our way through this, it doesn't necessarily work. So we have to be able to get through stigma. Stigma is a strong feeling of disapproval by society. It's usually unfair. It keeps people from receiving services and basic necessities. If as an officer you don't really believe in this, and if you don't really believe in this and there's no buy-in and you're really attached to that stigma, how effective do you think that officer is going to be in a call for service? You know, not very. And that also can be a huge barrier for people wanting to receive help. You know, they called for a reason. You know, it might not necessarily be most desirable to have the police show up at your door, but they called us for a reason. So if we're going to be there, if we're going to respond, if we're getting dispatched, then we need to position ourselves so that we put our best foot forward, and hopefully that they'll want to receive help from us. The next thing is confidentiality. That's a huge portion, and I don't think we have to really go too deep into the weeds as to why confidentiality with this is important. We want to be careful with who we share this information with. Even in terms of family members, you know, when I sometimes, depending on who calls, I'm very careful about what I go back and I share with that family member, because if I've already earned the trust of my consumer, I don't want to then lose that trust now because I've gone and shared information with the family member. It may not have an immediate effect on that call, but let's just say now they've been discharged from services and now they go back home and they find out that that family member finds out information that they maybe shared with me in confidence, or they share it with a medical staff in confidence. Then what does that do for the next time that we have to go out there and respond? I remember you shared valuable information, or it might not even be me. It could be another officer. And now, because of how I handle that sensitive information, it's hard to build that rapport the second time around. So with the consumer, we use the term consumer in CIT, and we prefer that over patient or client. It helps to kind of remove some of the stigma. One, it kind of it brings about the notion that anybody can receive services. You don't have to have like a specific diagnosis. I don't have a mental health diagnosis per se, but I still see a therapist. I still receive services. I still sit down every other week with my therapist and we talk about everything from life to sports to what I'm going to have for dinner. So, you know, I'm a consumer, and being also a consumer, it emphasizes the fact that, you know, we try to make them an active participant, because the most effective treatment is going to be the treatment that is done so through compliance. If we are forcing it and there is no compliance on the part of the consumer, if they don't feel like they're an active part of the decision-making process, it's not going to be as effective. This stair, or this ladder, it represents what we call the behavioral change stairway model. This is something that was born out of the FBI, and it is a huge part of what they use for crisis negotiation, or what you would probably known as hostage negotiators. They've kind of gotten away from that term, and now it's more crisis negotiation, because this can be something that is used not just for a hostage situation. It could be used for anybody in a crisis. The biggest thing that leads to being able to get to the very top of that ladder, which is behavioral change, is what happens at the bottom. It's active listening skills. And this is a cumulative process. So what that means is that you can't get to rapport without first displaying empathy for the individual. You can't get to a place where you're able to influence their behavior without having developed a rapport. And ultimately, we're not going to be able to change their behavior if we are not able to influence them. So it's a pretty cool concept, and there are many layers to it. The active listening skills, it employs the use of 8 smaller techniques to be able to get there. Minimal encouragers, open-ended statements, I statements, some effective pauses, reflections, summarizing. So all of those things come into play, and we actually teach all of that as part of the de-escalation portion of our CIT curriculum.
Is that part of the role playing also this?
Yes, yeah, absolutely it is. So of course the 4 coaching plays, that's kind of like the overarching theme. That's what, when we evaluate them, because their scenarios are going to be evaluated and they receive feedback at the end of the scenario. And the panel is usually made up of a police officer and somebody from DHS. So they are going to get feedback on their officer safety, because I can't stress it enough. At no point in time do we want them to sacrifice officer safety. So we're gonna assess them on tactics. We're gonna assess them on things that they did based on what we train them to do as police officers. But then we're gonna have somebody on the panel that works for DHS that is trained, that is a mental health professional that can speak more towards the things like the active listening and the things that are really within their wheelhouse, but we're now trying to teach officers to do. So active listening for us is it kind of deviates away from what we see on the left side, because when we teach, interviewing and interrogation in the academy, it's really about getting down to the nuts and bolts. We want the facts, because we need to be able to determine if there's a crime. And if so, the who, what, the where, when, the why, all the things that are going to be needed for us to be able to write a good substantive case report. However, in active listening, we need to be able to get that person that's at a 10 in their crisis, and we need to try to bring them down slowly, or as quickly as we possibly can. So we want to do things to lower their emotions. We want to be able to return the subject to normal, get them to a place where we can influence their behavior. So this is part of where, life experience sometimes comes in handy, because, if you're able to connect with a person, not by lying to them, if you have never been through something, don't ever lie to the person, because they can call you out on that. Let's say that they're smart. Don't tell somebody that that's going through PTSD after having served in the military that, oh yeah, I served too. Oh really? What unit? And then you're already lost. So oh, my daughter's calling. She wants food. I'm pretty sure it is. Empathy. So empathy is the use of open-ended questions. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with the person. It just means that you're able to show them that you are able to connect with where they're coming from. I can see why you would be upset about this. If somebody stole my car, I'd probably be upset too. Or if I had a pet and that was very close to, and I lost that pet, I could see why you're upset over having lost that bond or that connection. So empathy is very important. The more that we're able to show empathy, we're not telling the person that we understand, because we can't necessarily really understand it from their perspective. We don't live inside their body or inside their mind, but what we're trying to let them know is that, hey, I get where you're coming from. So that empathy piece is very important. Rapport. We build a rapport by doing things that are going to be on the left side, on the plus side of the column. I can see here how angry you are. That's that emotional labeling that we talk about from the 4 coaching plays. If you're able to attach a label to what they're feeling, that's important because that shows them that you're listening. And then it also leads you down the path where you can ask more open-ended questions. Open-ended questioning is a big part of what we do in CIT because it allows us to get more information. The more information we get, the more we have to be able to kind of put in our Rolodex and spit it back out at them. And maybe hopefully later on down the line, get them to that place where we're able to make a decision. We don't want to tell people to calm down when they're in crisis, because that just almost kind of dismisses the fact that they are upset. People are allowed to be angry. Angry is not a crime. And we can't be afraid to go in and deal with somebody that's angry. We can't be afraid to deal with go in and deal with somebody that's shouting. You know, that's part of it. You know, we get called out to deal with consumers at their worst possible moment for that day or maybe for that month. We need to be able to accept the emotion that they're displaying at that time. So telling somebody to calm down, it's not effective. We want them to calm down, of course we do, but we have to do so through our conversation and not just by telling them to do that. When we want to get to a place of influence, we want to be able to use good tone. We want to be careful with our choice of words. Effective pauses are great. Sometimes when we just pause effectively, it allows us to not only be able to think about what to say next, but it also allows for the consumer to think about what it is that they just said. And, you know, having that moment of reflection for themselves. Making I statements. So rather than telling somebody to calm down because they're yelling, you know, I would say, hey, man, it's making it very difficult for me to be able to understand you when you're talking so loud. I can't really process as well. Do you mind maybe lowering your voice a little bit? But I have to do so. I have to also mirror what I want. So I can't yell at them and tell them that I want them to be quiet, because that's just completely counterproductive. So there's a lot of work that goes into this, and which is why the scenarios, they're designed to kind of build off of what happens in the previous scenarios. So our role players, they're very animated, and sometimes the officers are thinking, you know, well, this is just really kind of overacting, until they actually get out there and then they deal with the person that is doing the very thing that that was being shown or being displayed in the role plays. And all of our role plays are going to be based off of actual calls for service. So we take calls for service and we they will pick them apart. I've never actually developed a role play myself, but I do know that that they are based off of calls for service that we have had here within the county. So behavioral change. This is, of course, what we want. This is the ultimate outcome. This is where our voice is our strongest tool. This is where empathy, it doesn't mean that we agree. It doesn't mean that we oppose them. It just means that I can see it from your perspective. Once we're able to do all of that, and we're able to do so in a way that does not present confrontation to them, because we don't want them to feel judged, then we get them to a place of decision. And that is what I have for you this evening on CIT. I know I was given 90 minutes. I know that we kind of got started a little later, but I think that we did it in just a little bit over an hour. Are there any more questions for me?
For the in-house, what are the protocols for the officers who are going through mental health? Are they?
You are gonna find out about. I will not steal Captain Drew's thunder. So, so he will definitely be talking about that shortly.
It's not like the formal phase. I mean, unbelievably thorough, and it I think highlights the commitment that ACPD has on this issue, and one that's growing and continuous for officers to deal with. I know on my few ride-alongs, cumulatively 12 whole hours of spending that time in, with officers. There were well over nearly half a dozen calls on all 3 shifts with some nexus towards a mental health issue. And that burden wasn't so much whether or not I'm a doctor and diagnosing this person as a mental health problem. It's just, it's very clear and very difficult in a lot of ways. And the way in which you kind of talked a little bit about earlier, how officers during your case studies is how officers have to put themselves into a position where it can be very uncomfortable for their safety, number one, for the person's safety they're responding to, and then of course for the public. And we talked at the very beginning, we're trying to come up with this is certainly not a black and white. An active shooter scenario is pretty black and white. You respond. This is as gray as you could possibly get within the profession. So thanks for taking the time to go through how the training is a vital component of officers.
What's important to realize is that, I could be fine one day when I call the police for help. And, it could just be a very, very borderline moment, crisis moment for me. And, you could have 3 or 4 or 5 interactions with me where everything is just, it's just average. And maybe we clear at 9:01, like our dispositions. But then all of a sudden it's that 6th call where everything just changes. And even though you develop rapport, you have a relationship, I'm a known EVP, it does not make that 6th call the same as the previous 5. And so while everything may have been okay, and you're like, man, I know Marcus, he's just having another bad day. And you know what, we'll be fine. We don't need a co-responder. I'm good. I'm just gonna go talk to him for a few minutes. That could be the day where all of a sudden I'm thinking to myself, today's the day that I want to die. And how do I want to do it? And do I want to do it in that moment? So it's human behavior is not an exact science. And so I think that CIT is important because it does not show you that if X happens, then you do Y. If A happens, then you do B. It basically kind of gives you the tools to be able to deal with human behavior and to show you that it can change at any given moment. It could change from call to call. It could change over the course of that call. You could deal with somebody that is just completely fine, and then all of a sudden there could be a trigger. It could be a family member that walks through the door. It could be something that you said that you didn't even intend to be, confrontational, and it could set them off. So this training is definitely.
Thank you. That was really great.
Yeah.
That was really great.
Really appreciate it.
So we do have one more presentation. However, my concern with that is time, and it's 8:45 now. I'm fairly certain it's not 15-minute presentation, so it depends on we're in the long haul, but I do think it's important. However, we can fix the schedule for our next training to put that as being the forefront, so we still get the full plethora of it. I think the most important point here is that for Dave's training is that, we need to be able to service the community. We can only do that if we ourselves are well. And I think to Nika's point there, he explains that on what we do as a department. So I will leave it up to you guys how you want to proceed.
Well, we had planned until 9, so will this take roughly 15 minutes or how?
No,
it won't. Okay.
It's definitely won't.
Okay. Well, I don't want to. I would this is such important training to us that I would let's defer it, Jim. You're our training POC, so I'm going to let you get with Captain Chamberlain and let's make an adjustment because this is really good, important training for us. And I've got a lot, just as all the questions and comments. And I'll be working, our focus right now is training, getting professionally qualified to do our job. And so quality training is important. But after we get done with training, I'm going to talk to Jim about reaching back to you because maybe optional stuff for us while we're waiting for something, hopefully nothing ever gonna happen because we're all being proactive. But while we're waiting, I tell you, there might be something, hey, if somebody wants to go watch a CIT training, I tell you, some of that stuff sounds interesting to me. And the last thing I'll say is the reason I asked you earlier about, I mentioned the training because I got to witness this several times. And I knew this training there had to be something to what you guys are doing because I watched it in some very tense situations. So Chief, you guys, whatever you're doing, this is good to actually feel it now. But Jim, I'll talk to you offline maybe. Like I said, we'll get our training done, but I want to look for other things where we can kind of continue to grow as a cop. And I said that thing earlier that when I asked that question about complaints, it kind of rang in my head that that might be something, our role, independent cop is complaining. And so it could be a mental health one. I don't know, but this has been really good.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
Since we have a
Sorry,
couple
Andy.
extra.
No worries.
Just a
I
second.
live 10 minutes up the road, so not a big deal. I was driving back to somewhere, an hour and a half away. No big deal.
Okay, all right, so we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna defer. And hopefully you're gonna be next in the breach and we'll be ready. We'll be eagerly.
I
Waiting.
promise I'm not retiring. I will be here.
Well,
Yes.
I'm sorry
Yes.
that, others missed this training, so I hopefully that at our next one, we'll have our
Yeah.
whole squad.
Yeah, we definitely need to, and we'll have to talk about how people get this. Okay, what we're gonna do then with the additional time here, I'm gonna go ahead and say, is there any additional business or comments? And I'm first gonna start with Mummy.
Thank you, Gary. First of all, I just want to thank